Today I'm going to be building a dream wheel set for my wife, Dusty Betty, featuring BERD spokes, Onyx hubs, and Ibis Carbon S35 rims. My wife's amazing. She raises a great kid. She works really hard as a mountain bike coach, as a YouTuber, and she's back at school full time. And I wanted to surprise her and get her a dream wheel set for her mountain bike. She totally deserves it. And so today we're going to be putting together some amazing parts to make a killer wheel set. So she is sponsored by Ibis. We have the Ibis S35 carbon rims. We have Onyx. These are so cool. These are brand new. Onyx Vesper hook flange hubs in beautiful sapphire peacock. Onyx hubs are 100% silent. Like, they're as quiet as a front hub. They're my favorite hubs. And they have true instant engagement. And it's a little bit of a soft engagement, so you don't get that clunk. And I find that my shifting is better. I find my half ratcheting is better. And I find that I coast faster with these than something like an i9 or Chris King. These hook flanges are unique. They are meant for these BERD spokes where you just hook the spoke in there to build it. There's no eyelet, there's no threading of holes. You just hook it right on that hook flange. Really cool. And that brings us to the extra special piece of this build, these BERD spokes. These are string spokes, but it's not string like you think of them. These are stronger than steel and way lighter. I've been using the same material in my backpacking gear for years. I've got shelters made out of it. I've got backpacks made out of it. It's proven extremely reliable. I have 2 wheel sets now with BERD spokes. This will be the 3rd in the family, and it is one of my favorite ways to lighten up a wheel, to stand out a little bit, and to get a softer ride out of your wheel. My wife weighs about 115 pounds, and so when she's smashing down the trail, every little bit of compliance helps, even on a full suspension. Let's get building, and I'll show you some of the unique things about this build. These Ibis S35 rims are quite light. They're built by Stands for Ibis, and they're a 35i rim, and as you can see, they have an offset spoke hole. So the spoke holes are offset to get even, pretty close to even spoke length on each side to give it a stronger wheel, so it's not stronger on one side than the other. And once again, these hook flange hubs, they're kind of hard to show on camera, but they're just this little hook that this loop goes onto, and that's the hub side of your spoke. And the other side is threaded. It's a little metal insert in here. You can see about how far in it goes. And it's kind of like those old finger trap toys. The harder it pulls, the harder it grabs, and it's also secured on there. And so that is the threaded spoke end that will go into the nipples. For nipples, I've gone with aluminum Sapim Secure Lock. They've got a little indentation in there that kind of holds it, and they don't unlock as much. These are way better than most cheap aluminum nipples. Normally I build with brass, but after talking to the guys at BERD, they said these do really well with their spokes, and I trust their recommendations. You have to do a lot of research and background before you build with BERD spokes. You have to actually measure your rims and not just go off the ERD that the company gave you. So that took a little while to get the rims in, measure them, then place my order from BERD. So traditionally, when you wanted to build a wheel set with BERD spokes, you had to modify your hubs, which were meant for a J-hook spoke. Now, some people were great at modifying their hubs to do that, and some people weren't. If you weren't great at it, you could leave a sharp edge and actually cut your string spoke. It's not string, but I'm going to call them string spokes for the ease of describing this. And so some people would build up their wheels and say, I keep breaking spokes. And BERD would say, did you ream out the hole properly? And they're like, no, I didn't want to buy your special tool. Well, no wonder you're breaking spokes. You needed to modify it. Well, with this new hook flange hub, you don't need to do any reaming. You don't need to do any modifying. It's simple, set it and forget it for people who are building with these spokes. So you don't have to worry about your hub prep to make sure you did it right. It removes one more step that people can mess up and have messed up when lacing up their own wheels. So these hubs only work with BERD spokes. They only work with this loop on the end here. You're not going to be able to one day switch to a traditional spoke. And so you're committed to BERD spokes when you do this. And, you know, by this point, when you pay for BERD spokes, I think it's pretty fair to say that you're committed because they're not cheap spokes. So these Onyx hook flange hubs are the first and to date only hubs I know of that are designed specifically to run BERD spokes and BERD spokes only. Here are the tools I'm using. A Park Tool TS 4.2 truing stand. I have the Park Tool SW15. It's the spoke wrench. It accesses the spoke nipples from the back side of the rim, which is really nice. I have the Park Tool TM1 tension meter. This tool I got from BERD. It holds the spokes so that they don't twist when I'm putting the nipples on. And then I've got some Finish Line wet lube. It's chain lube, but I'm gonna lubricate the spokes and the nipples with these so that they will keep turning. Normally I don't love aluminum nipples on wheel builds, but the Sapeems are a step above. They're really great nipples, so I'm not worried about those cracking. Now this is a more involved, a little bit more complicated wheel build than a traditional wheel build. The spokes are floppy, and that makes for some interesting wheel building. You know, when you go to line it up with the spoke hole, it doesn't line up unless you're using gravity with it. So there's a couple little tricks. I'm going to show you what I've done to make it work. By no means am I an expert. This is not a how-to, but it might give you some tips if you're doing it. If you've never built a wheel before, I don't recommend this be your first wheel build. There are a ton of fantastic how to build a wheel videos out there on YouTube. This isn't going to be one of them. This is just my story. So if you take a look at this hub, you'll notice it's totally different from another hub. It doesn't have a traditional flange where the spokes go in. Instead, these rope spokes, I'm calling them, have a loop, and they just hook right in on this hook flange. Really simple. The tricky part is they also come off. So if you're not careful, you know, on a normal wheel build, you can drop all your spokes in and then kind of handle the hub. On this, if you do that, they can easily come off. So I'll show you a few tricks that I use to make that a little bit simpler. And these are a brand new product. There's not much info out there, so I'm really grateful for Onyx for sending these in so we could get them out in front of you guys. All right, step one is to lace the hub. So to lace it up, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can start with a trailing spoke, which means it trails. It's the, you know, when you're driving, it's pulling instead of pushing. It's trailing behind. And here is a leading spoke that goes inside this hole to clip on here. So they pull in opposite directions, and the trailing spoke holds the leading spoke on. Let's do one more of those here. Okay, now here's the tricky part. These all want to come off. What I would love to see is like a little snap ring or some sort of tool that clips over this that holds it on. I don't have one of those, so I'm just going to use some masking tape. So I'm going to put a piece of masking tape on right here over the gap between the hook flange so I don't have to worry about these slipping off. And then I'm going to go all the way around and do that. It's a bit fiddly, and this is a little bit of a pain, and it's tricky, and it's a little bit frustrating because you can easily lose the work you just did if you're not careful. I'd be curious to hear of anyone that's used these before and what they do to hold those on. All right, so I've got one side all laced up in tape. She ain't pretty, but those aren't going to fall off. I wonder if these could have like a little bit tighter clearance in here in these little gaps so that it kind of snaps in and doesn't want to come out. I don't know. I think it'd be cool to make a little tool to make those easier. So I've discovered another little trick in doing that last one, but it's easier to just thread these into each other like this and then put them on that way straight on the flange instead of fiddling around with it otherwise. So I'm going to get them all ready like this. Okay, leading is straight and trailing is outside. All right, we got it all laced up and taped so that they don't fall off while I'm just trying to get it onto the rim. The next step is to lace these into the rim. Now, another really interesting thing about BERD spokes, they stretch a ton. So after you lace them all up, you tension the wheel, and then you have to leave it overnight and come back, and they've lost some of their stretch. Then you retension it again, then wait another night, then retension it again. And so because these stretch, lacing them's harder because you can only get one, maybe two threads on here before the spokes are too short everywhere. And you can't just poke them into the rim holes like you can on a traditional metal spoke build. So you got to be patient, and this part's actually pretty tricky, lacing up the rim. So with these Sapeem secure lock nipples. These are aluminum nipples. You do not need spoke prep or Loctite. I'm just going to use a drop of Finish Line wet lube. This is what BERD uses on their builds. So I'm going to thread it through the hole. And then I'm going to put on my spoke nipple washer. And then my Supreme secure lock nipple. And I'm only going to thread it on to engage 2 threads. And then I'm just going to continue all the way around. I'm going to do the trailing spokes first. Okay, now I've got the trailing spokes on each side laced up. You can see when it winds up and you put power on, these are trailing the direction it's going. Pretty cool. Thank goodness I've got this tape. It's holding the leading spokes on from all slipping off. Now I'm going to lace up the leading spokes. Now this is where it gets tricky. I'm starting to lace my leading spokes and doing the cross pattern, and things are getting tight. I can't reach these through the hole. These need to stretch and they're going to get longer. So here's the trick. You use the BERD tool on here. You put a spoke nipple on your SW15 tool. You put a washer on that nipple. You place it through the rim and you use this tool to pull it in just enough. This is so tricky to get 2 threads on. All right, we got it. That one's in. It gets harder as you go, and by the end, you're really pulling on that. And sometimes I'll throw it in the truing stand and kind of manipulate it that way. I'll show you my tricks to get the last couple ones in. But this is where it starts to get tricky, and this tool is so useful to be able to slip in that notch and really pull on it. This bit's definitely trickier than lacing a regular wheel. Excellent. Come on, engage. All right. All right, this is getting really hard to reach the nipples on this. So I'm going to throw it in the truing stand, and I can get a little more leverage on it this way. All right, with the wheel in the rim, I can kind of bend these, tighten and loosen these spokes by pulling on them. So when I bring the rim over, it lines it up, and this doesn't have to go at such an angle. So I'm going to pull the rim toward me just a little, and I'm pulling down pretty hard on this tool on my right hand. Are you engaged? I can't tell. Nope. All right. I think that's in. Woohoo!
All right, now I've got the wheel all laced up. All the spokes are connected to the nipples. This is pretty fun to see just how out of true the wheel is because I've just barely laced it up, but it's all over the place. Lateral and radial runout is all over the place. Well, that's okay. We're just getting the spokes tight right now. Now, unlike a traditional spoke, if I start twisting the nipple here, you'll see the actual spoke is spinning. It's twisting. And this will just wind up and twist like a kite string. And you don't want a twisted spoke. So the next step is for me to go through every single spoke and straighten it. And so I'm going to watch the weave pattern and make sure it didn't get twisted at all when I put it in. Anytime I move one of the nipples to true it, I have to hold this to keep the spoke straight. This is the same procedure you would use with a bladed spoke. So this isn't unique just to BERD spokes. But if you've never built with either, you'll definitely need to pay attention to that. It's definitely easier to straighten these spokes out while they're loose before you've tensioned them. Once they're under tension, it's a little bit harder to see the weave. And so I like to do it now while they're still finger loose. I've got all the spokes straightened, and they've got a little bit of tension on them right now. They're still very loose though, very loose. And so I'm going to thread all the spoke nipples on another 4 or 5 turns to get somewhat relative base tension so I can start dishing and do an initial truing. And then I'm going to bring it up to even higher tension in a little bit. Now I get to take my tape off. So this, once again, this tape was just to help keep these spokes over the loop while there was no tension on them. Now that there's plenty of tension on them, they hold themselves in and they kind of lock themselves in. But the tape worked. It did what I needed it to. If any of you have better ideas and you've done this a different way, let me know. Man, Onyx has some beautiful colors on their powder coating options. You can customize your hubs like crazy. My wife Tess picked these out. She wanted this sapphire peacock and it looks killer in person. BERD spokes also come in white, and you can also dye them. So you can get a whole bunch of different colors on your spokes. Now you want to dye them before you pull them tight, because when they're tensioned, the fibers, the pores are so small they won't accept the dye. So you can't just build it up and then dye your spokes. It doesn't work very well that way. From here, it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to true it at this low tension, and then I will slowly raise the tension up to 15 on my tensiometer. And once it's there, I need to leave it for 24 hours to let the spokes relax. Remember, these spokes stretch a couple times initially. So you got to bring them up to tension, let them relax overnight, bring them up to tension, let them stretch again, let them relax overnight, and then it's done. So it takes a little bit longer, like elapsed time, but it's not a ton of extra work. You know, when I retension these and tune them up, it takes maybe 5 minutes each time. So if you're building a whole bunch of these, it's not going to add a lot to your workflow. But if you're hoping to crank these out the night before a race, you're not going to be able to do that because you need to fully detension each of these spokes. I've got it all tensioned up. It's perfectly true. It's tensioned to 15 on my tensiometer. And now I'm going to go and leave it overnight and come back, and it will have lost tension, and then I'll repeat the process. All right, it's rested overnight, and my tension went from 15 to 7. So the spoke has stretched to where tension has halved. Each time they detension less. So now it's time to tension these back up to 15 on the tensiometer, true it all up, and then leave it overnight again to let it detension, but it won't detension as much this time. All right, these are all at 15 on the tight side, a little bit less on the brake side. That's about how I would expect it. Now I'm just going to give it a final true and let it sit overnight again to detension. It's going to detension about from 15 to 12, which is about our final tension that we want this at. Dead straight. Those trued up beautifully. Now I'm going to leave it overnight again and let those detension one more time, and then it'll be ready for its final true. All right, it's been another 16 hours. 12, right where it's supposed to be. That is awesome. And it's dead true. I don't need to true it at all, but I thought I would check that tension, make sure it's good. That means my wheel build is complete. It's time to weigh these things. Now keep in mind, Onyx hubs are heavier than the Weight Weenie hubs, so that's going to affect the total wheel weight. However, weight at the center of your rim is not as important as weight at the outside of your rim. So that's why we're running aluminum spoke nipples, because you'll feel the difference between aluminum and brass. That's why we're running a carbon rim. That's why we're running these BERD spokes. So if you could have weight anywhere, it would be in the center of the hub where it is. So don't just rate these on their total overall weight. Oh, nice. Rear wheel, 916 grams. Awesome. Front wheel. Wow, 675 grams. That is seriously light. A lot of people like to oversimplify life and boil things down to one nice round little number that we can just compare all numbers and know what's best. I caution you against doing that, especially if your number is weight. Weight is important and it makes a difference, but I would argue that a high engagement hub that's fast rolling and totally silent is worth far more than the lightest hubs you can find out there. That's why I'm always personally willing to go with Onyx hubs. I don't feel the weight difference when they're in the center of my wheel, but that instant and totally silent engagement, incredible. And for a wheel set with a 35i rim, that's impressive to get it this light. So there were a couple gotchas on this wheel build, but I think as long as you tape over the gap between these hook flanges, you're not going to have any problems.
Make sure you remember to keep your spokes straight and don't let them get any twist in it. Hold it while you're tensioning them. Tension them evenly and slowly, and make sure you wait overnight and tension them a few times. And it's really not a difficult build process. I thought it was very straightforward. They built up really nicely and it came out fantastic. I want to give a huge shout out to BERD for providing the spokes for this build, Onyx for the hubs, and Ibis for the rims. You've heard me say it before and I'll say it again. The best upgrade you can make to a quality bike is high-end wheels. Light wheels with a rim profile that's not overly harsh and with a fast engaging hub will completely change the way you ride your bike. It'll make your shifting smoother. In this case, it'll make your ride quieter. You'll see more animals. You'll have more momentum and you'll carry more speed through places where you used to have to sneak in a couple pedals. Something about these Onyx hubs just lend to the ride experience to just feel connected with your trail and feel a little bit more joy and get lost in your surroundings. I know a lot of people like the high engagement, loud, buzzy hubs. If that's your thing, great. The Onyx is not going to be for you. But if you've never ridden an Onyx hub, I encourage you to try it. It's such a unique feeling. There's a slight weight penalty to it, but I've got an Onyx hub going on 7 years now with no problems. I have one of the initial Vespers that gave me some problems, and I've warrantied out a couple parts on it. But these newer Vespers have been upgraded to overcome the faults that are in mine. So my wife, Dusty Betty, has a YouTube channel, and she's going to be reviewing these and putting some miles on them. And if you want to get her thoughts, go check it out to see her reactions, to see if you think you would notice the difference. A lot of people say, I know, Steve, you're highly sensitive to all these tiny little things. Am I really going to feel a difference? 100% you will feel a difference on an Onyx hub, and 100% you will feel the weight difference of BERD spokes. The how quickly you can spin up and get these things moving is unreal. And it's really nice to be able to run 29ers with big meat on them, with big tires on them, and have it accelerate more like a 27.5 bike than a 29er because of that light, snappy acceleration that they have. This has been so fun getting experimental and building these up. Head on over to Dusty Betty's channel to see what she thinks of them. Thanks for watching, everybody. There's a party in the mountains, and you're invited.